MDRC, we are a 501c3 statewide nonprofit organization that celebrates the diversity of, disabilities. We also see it as just a natural part of the human experience. We see disability as just part of a person's identity just as much as their race or gender. LEAD is a leadership program. We are a program that's specifically for the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color. We do leadership work, trainings for that respective community.
LEAD stands for Leadership, Engagement, and Advocacy Development. Considering the BIPOC community, one of the issues is what it means for them to be in that intersection of having a disability and being a person of color and navigate the system. Sometimes that navigation is quite challenging.
What we've seen in the past is these communities don't have the information, or sometimes because of how the services are set up, whether it's because of the time of day, whether it's because of lack of cultural sensitivity in terms of how the programs are designed, it might not be as inviting for people of color.
Being in the LEAD program was a very enlightening process. I got an opportunity to meet other people from different backgrounds. I learned a lot of the technical pieces regarding disability and race that you know it because you live it, but the theory behind a lot of that stuff you really don't know. So it was empowering.
Some of my babies have special needs. I was left to figure out things for myself. I had never heard of celiac, never heard of a gluten allergy, and that's something that my daughter has, and there was no supports for me. The LEAD program really showed me how to show up in community. It talked about intersectionality, and it was just really important that I bring what was taught to me into spaces of non-disability spaces. Just being able to recognize our differences. And so this has really helped me to become a stronger leader and be an advocate in spaces that don't see people with disabilities. They're invisible.
My hope is to expand the program to different urban sectors across the state of Michigan, helping people advocate for the changes that they need, give them access to information that will better their lives, educate around disability. Hello, everyone. My name is Tamika Sitchin Spruce, and my pronouns is she and her. Just a quick image description. I am a brown-skinned woman with long black hair, and I'm wearing a patterned brown and black sweater, and I'm just really excited for all of you to join us today for educating the Black Disabled Child Black History event. I am the co-director of LEAD, which you saw in the video. LEAD is a leadership program for BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, for BIPOC parents and individuals with disabilities. And so this is our annual Black History event. So I'm really excited to see all of you today. And so before I give it to my co-moderator and co-director of the LEAD program, just quickly tell you a little bit of what we're going to do today. And so we're going to, you see the video, and then I will go into a little bit of the history of of African American parents, they're fighting for education for their child with a disability, and also some history of Black individuals with disabilities who fought for their education. And then David and I will go into the panel discussion with our esteemed panelists, Nick Simonet, Lenitra Kaler, and Heather Clark, all experts in the field of education, and I'm really excited to have them for joining us today. If you are of need of a closed caption, you can add it. If you're the virtual studio audience watching us on StreamYard today, I will shortly put some links um, in the chat for you to instructions to add a closed caption to your Google Chrome, Internet Explorer, or Safari. So whatever browser that you are using, you will be able to add closed caption if needed today. And we also have Nakaya, who is joining us. As I say, language interpreter for today. So that's a little bit of what is going to happen, and so I'm going to give it to David right now.
Thank you, Tamika. Yes, welcome to this amazing conversation we're about to have. My name is David Brotherson. I'm co-director with Tamika. I have about 10 years working in the disability community, primarily as an advocate. I've done some work at the state level. I've done work in a variety of settings, including the classrooms. I've worked with um, uh, almost high school level, again, with disability employment supports or independent living type training. So I a very, very minute bit of experience in that area. But before we dive in, Tamika, why are we having this conversation? What is the significance of this conversation?
And so the significance is that you can't tell, but I use a wheelchair. So I have, a spinal cord injury that I acquired as a baby. And so I grew up with a physical disability. And so I understand firsthand knowledge of, what it's like to, navigate the educational system. Just real quick, I was placed in special ed. I was labeled as POHI during the 90s, so that's physically or otherwise health impaired. So I was mainstream one half the time, and then I was also, in a special ed class with Paul classroom. And so in sixth grade, I advocated for myself to be in full time with my peers. And so, just understanding, the navigation of with a disability and the challenges that face. Also, I was in a predominantly white school in the suburbs of Detroit, and so I've experienced things like with racism, and from some of my peers, from some of the teachers, did and said things towards me because of my disability and such. So I really really passionate about education and why this is needed. But since it's Black History Month, I have to get to a little bit of the history of why we have this discussion. Understand that this has been a long fight for, just not only for, of course, Black children to have equitable education in America, but then also there were challenges as African American children. Um, facing equitable education. So I'm just going to quickly share just a few stories to give context and set the tone for the conversation today. So the first one I want to go to is, let's see, can you see the school, David? No, okay. Okay. So the first school I want to go to is that uh, this was the first school of shortly after um, slavery during Reconstruction era. That's when, of course, children, black children, who were able to go to school. This is after slavery during the Reconstruction era, and so typically it was in churches where black children went to it. And of course, we know in the South, it was segregated schools, and so this right here, the picture of a schoolhouse was the state school for the deaf and blind, the Negro School for the deaf and blind, which was in North Carolina. And so this opened up in, I believe, 1869. And so this was, again, a segregated um, school that black children who were deaf and blind attended. And so that's an interesting Black History fact because people do not know, what happened to children, who were disabled. So, and then there are other schools that popped up, across the country for children, um, Black children, but this was, again, the first school. Okay. I'm also going to go to um, another story, which is very interesting, is like what happened to, children. What was it like to go to school if you were, African American with a disability? And there was one young lady named Elizabeth Suggs. Elizabeth Suggs. This is a picture of her. She's a brown skinned woman wearing a black dress and like white ruffle around her collar. She's a brown skinned woman, a young woman. This picture is of her at 16. Um, she has brittle bone disease, or she had brittle bones disease. And so her parents were former enslaved people, and I forgot what state it was that she was from, but she was very smart, and so her sisters carefully carried her into um, the schoolhouse. And so to make sure she had got an education, and at 18, she wrote a book, an autobiography entitled Shadows and Sunshine, which detailed her life. So this is, just one of, examples of, she and her family, made sure she received, education and was able to write. So just imagine, how incredible that would be to be able to do that during the early 1900s. And then um, there is, um, um, let's see, Louise Miller is get stuck. Okay. Well, Louise Miller is she was a woman. She has a very interesting story. Um, she was a mother during it was 1952, and she had a son that was deaf, and um, she was deaf. I mean, her son was deaf, and she fought. He had to go to a segregated school because this was in Maryland, and she, it was just hard. She had to send her child off to, um, a segregated school far away, and it was just so challenging, and so she fought. This was the first time that she sued the school district of Maryland, of the city of where she was living at, for her child to go to the white deaf school. And this is like 1952 or 1942. I'm sorry, 1942, and she won. And so her child actually went to the white school for the deaf, and so that was the first time that black children were able to go to school in the South with white children. Um, and this was before the Brown versus Board of Education. And so she was that's just an example of a child of a parent advocating for their child to have a right to have an education. Okay. So it seems like my screen is stuck. So can you go ahead, David, with the
Yeah, sure.
panelists?
Yeah, so
Sorry about
so we're going to introduce our panelists. Would you, Tamika, are you able to bring the panelists on?
yeah.
Okay, so our panelists are going to introduce themselves before we begin with the questions.
Oh man. Okay. For some reason my
All right.
computer froze. Let's see.
Okay, so I
Okay, yes,
I was
please.
able to do it. I was able to
Okay,
do it.
great, thank you.
Yes, okay. All right, so panelists, would you begin to introduce yourselves? We can start with Lenetra.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lenitra Keller. I am the principal and founder consultant of Insight Educational Solutions. I am a licensed educator. I've worked over 2 decades in education across multiple states, as well as a parent of a child with a learning disability. So I had to learn how to advocate for my child and navigate her through the system and get the supports needed. Um, I'm also an advocate and a mentor locally in the area.
Thank you, Lenetra. Nick, would you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nick Simonette. I am an educator, a facilitator, and coach. I run Minor Mindset, which is focused on adolescent life coaching. I'm an academic behavior coach for the Grosse Pointe Public School System, where I work on trying to guide students who have challenges towards more successful outcomes, either behaviorally or academically.
Thanks, Nick. Heather, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Heather Clark, and first and foremost, I'm also a Black, neurodiverse, chronically ill and disabled femme. I didn't get formally diagnosed until I was an adult after my oldest was also diagnosed with neurodiversity. And so I'm also a mother, and I have two children, one who is neurodiverse and one who has minor hearing loss. I'm also an educator in the field of special education and also a adjunct professor of special education and child development and a parent advocate and disability rights advocate. And I work both in New York City, the largest school district in the country, and also nationally advocating on anti-Blackness and ableism, working to dismantle it in our school system. I'm a universal design for learning curriculum specialist. So I work with student teachers on how we can dismantle our current systems and look at education from a whole different paradigm. So, not in how we can make people with disabilities fit a norm and use behavioralistic models, but how we can look at how our systems disable us. So, we're not our, you know, it's not that we have to change and fit a format or change who we are or how we think, but that the systems around us disable us and keep us from thriving. So it's a very different kind of mindset than what we're used to seeing in the school systems. Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
That is an excellent segue, and thank you for that. So and I want to just add, before we get into the conversation, that our panelists are actually being modest, right? Because I happen to know that they are even more deeply involved in advocacy. Their work goes a lot deeper and a lot wider than time would permit for them to share with us. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your minds as we have this conversation. But Heather said something that I'm glad was said, which is neurodiversity. So before we get into the conversation, maybe we should define some terms. When we say disability, maybe we can contrast uh, a person with disability, a person who is disabled versus a person who is neurodiverse or divergent mind. What do all of those terms mean? And since you started out by introducing at least two of those terms, Heather, why don't you help us? What do those terms mean?
So the neurodivergent movement came from the idea that um, there is nothing wrong with having a brain that doesn't fit or work with the what is considered the typical mindset. And so there are many different neurodivergent ways of being. So if you're dyslexic, that's a type of neurodivergent, um, as is having ADHD or being autistic, or um, having chronic perseverant anxiety disorder. Those are all different ways your brain can be neurodiverse or neurodivergent. Um, so you can have a quote unquote typically working brain. But in our society, we tend to focus on what's considered the medical model of normality. So only certain types of bodies are considered good or functioning, and anyone who diverges from that is considered wrong or bad. And so then we want everyone else who doesn't conform into that way to be smushed into the conformative box. And what's interesting is the disability community is the largest diverse community in the world and in the United States. So whether you have a physical disability, an invisible disability like neurodivergence, or a combination of both, it encompasses every race, every gender identity, every religion, every socioeconomic group. But still, the medical model persists that if you are not one type of way, one type of body, one type of thinking, one type of hearing, which is very autist. So not ASL, but everyone should be speaking with their voice as opposed to using ASL or communication devices, then it's wrong. And so we want everyone to be one type of way and not another type of way. The neurodivergent way of thinking is the opposite of that. It's saying, actually, what is wrong with stimming? Why should we get people to not stim when everyone stims? It's just certain types of stims are considered socially acceptable and certain stims are not. And so I come in and work with teachers and I say, why are you telling a child that they can't flap if that helps them calm down and regulate their system? There's something, there's nothing inherently wrong with a child flapping. And so this idea that we need behaviorism, which by the way comes from gay conversion therapy and Pavlov, which did horrible things to children and animals, has a very ugly history. You know, we don't have to inherently change people and who they are based on societal norms. We know that that comes directly out of anti-blackness, ableism, and this idea that only one type of body or one type of way of being is right, when we know that throughout humanity, all sorts of ways of being have always been a part of us. So it's a very long-winded answer, but that would be my answer to that.
So no, I appreciate that. Because what we want to do is we want to have a deep conversation, and we want to get as much richness out of the conversation. I think in order to get there, we need to define some of the terms. And one area you seem to be leaning into, and I'd like one of the other panelists to kind of lean into that and give us some understanding, is this idea of ableism. So when the term ableism is used, what are we what how should we understand that term? Nick or
I'll jump in there. I think when we think about ableism, I think we're also thinking about like um, a certain amount of privilege, right? That kind of comes along with quote unquote able-bodied people, where we don't have to necessarily think about, um, how we're going to get into a building and how we're going to get out of a building, right? We don't have to think about certain things. And so ableism is really weaved into the very fabric of our civilization, of our culture, of our society, where we are constantly kind of pitting everyone, comparing everyone to what is quote unquote normal, and how people who are differently abled have to navigate through the world.
thanks, Nick. So the other question that I believe it leads us to is, what is this idea of intersectionality? Venetra, would you help us?
Well, intersectionality is making sure that all components of a person, of a whole person, is identified as well as appreciated. You have individuals who are impacted with disabilities, and then they are impacted because of maybe their race, or they're impacted because of their socioeconomic status. And so all of those things intersect with one another when we're navigating through the educational space as well as through our social spaces. And so that's just an overview of the intersectionality that we encounter, or that our children encounter as they navigate various spaces.
So before I hand it over to Nika, I just want to add that there's an inherent tension in the disability movement. There was a so I think the first model, of course, was the medical model, which Venetia mentioned, which persists. But then after the medical model, there was the independent living model, which was pretty much focused on how do we achieve independence? How do we get everything done for ourselves? And ultimately, where we've ended up, to some extent, and that's also uh, there's some changes happening there, is the social justice model. And in the social justice model, the recognition is that it's not only about becoming independent, but more or less interdependent. And an important part of it is understanding the significance of power, the significance of being able to make a choice, whether it's to carry the label of a disability, whether it is to carry the label of neurodivergent, to not identify at all, right? Because there are consequences for identifying in any way or with any group or with any community. Uh, in the disability uh, in the particular space that we work in, disability pride is absolutely important. So I, for example, I identify as neurodivergent. However, I am proud of every aspect of myself. And when I talk with students, in particular, specifically the reason why I take the particular approach is when I've worked with students in the high school students, most of the students, I would say probably not 70, maybe 80% of the students do not identify as having a disability. And it has nothing to do with pride. It has to do with the reality of what it means to take on that label. And we'll get into some things later in our conversation. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Tamika.
Yes, yes, and that's a great segue to one of the challenges and what area that I am very passionate about is criminal justice and what we now know to be, the school to prison pipeline. There was a report, a new report called Unlock Futures by the National Center for Learning Disabilities. And according to the report, as many as 70% of youths involved in the juvenile justice system have a disability. And also, the ACLU shows that in 2020, Black youth overall were 2.3 times more likely to be, arrested than white youth. And so, when you are a Black youth and you're more of risk to be in the, caught in the school to prison pipeline, and then you have a disability on top of that. Um, and there's it's so hard to overcome that particular barrier and not get trapped per se in this system. And so my first question is why do you and this goes to Lenitra, why do you think African American children with disabilities are subjugated to higher suspension and expulsion rates than their peers?
That's a great question. And being in the classroom and in the education system for quite a while, a lot of schools have different philosophies of how they handle discipline or disruptions in the classroom in the schools. Some schools enact zero tolerance policies where one infraction, you can be suspended, expelled, and some of these, kind of high stakes responses to students' behavior, which could be taken care of inside the school, is kind of exported outside the school. And I'd also say that certain communities and some of our children come from a lot of different types of home and community backgrounds. And sometimes there are various traumas that students experience outside of the school. And because they're human, they bring it with them when they come to school. So if you have staff and educators that are in the building responsible for class culture, classroom learning, and they don't understand that, sometimes their initial response and reaction is to, remove the child from the space, remove the child from the school, opposed to taking the time to understand that this is a whole person coming into this learning environment, and how can I help support this child in navigating that with creating boundaries and creating a safe environment to do so. But it definitely, I've seen over my experience of, like I said, 2 decades, there are varying philosophies inside the rooms of the school, as well as inside the individual classrooms and the buildings itself.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Tamika, can I add to this?
Oh, yes, please.
So, I've also been working in the school system for over 20 years, and I just have to kind of jump in, I'm sorry, and counter that. I think the number one reason why Black children are being funneled into the prison system is anti-Black bias, period. Point blank, period. I actually regularly lecture on this, and I teach on this in my college and graduate school courses. In 2016, the Yale University did a study on this, and the number one place where Black children are actually expelled and suspended is in pre-K. I have all the statistics, and I will happily share this with you. I've done many, many lectures on this. This is actually one of my areas of expertise on Black children in early childhood who are disabled, who get suspended and arrested. And I work on this regularly in New York City, the largest school district in the country. And in 2016, the Yale University did a study on this, and they took a group of preschool teachers and they studied them, and they looked at children and they divided them into groups: Black boys, Black girls, white boys, white girls, and they gave them stereotypical Black and white names, right? So Lakeisha, Latoya, Jamal, Jabari, Becky, Chad. I'm just using examples. I'm not saying those examples. And they told the teachers to look out for white teachers and Black teachers to look out for bad behavior. I'm going to give you a secret. There was no bad behavior. None. But when you go looking for something, you usually what? Find it. The white teachers looked and found Black behavior, bad behavior in the Black children. 9 times out of 10 in the Black boys and in the Black girls, but more so in the Black boys. We have seen time and time again that these children are suspended and expelled. I am actually going to be also giving a talk for Autism in Black on adultification bias in Black girls. Black girls are suspended at a rate 5 times higher than their white peers for engaging in the exact same behavior. I have worked with 6-year-old, 5-year-old Black girls who have been taken out of school in handcuffs for crying. There's no trauma coming from those homes. The trauma those kids have experienced is from being arrested in the classroom. So I have to kind of counter this idea. First of all, zero tolerance doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's not helpful. We know that. I mean, I'm a child development professor. We know that it doesn't work. But beyond that, teachers come in with bias. And we have study after study that throughout our system in this country, the majority of teachers working in schools are white, and they work in urban areas, and they bring in with them their racial bias and their gender bias and what they think how certain children are going to act. And there's a direct tie between that and enslavement. And it goes back to the anti-Blackness and ableism. We see those same trends with Indigenous children on reservations and in poor areas where Indigenous children are the main population. So I just have to bring in the evidence, studies, and the facts there that that's what's happening to our children, is the bias that we see happening again and again with teachers who do not have the cultural competency. And what is happening to our children? It's racism and ableism, plain and simple. We are also living in a society where electroshock therapy is still given to children, where children are still isolated and put into rooms and locked up. So this is what's going on, and we have to just be able to call it what it is. I mean, I'm not afraid to say what it is. And I think we all have to be able to do that, to be brave for our children, because they're all our children. So I'm sorry, I just had to interject because I'm working with a parent right now who her 6-year-old little girl was arrested for crying. My
Yeah,
apologies.
yeah. No, no, I totally understand. And yeah, as you said, there's, numerous studies on, racial bias and, anti-blackness and, ableism. And yes, all, stemmed, in the past and, is part of, white supremacy. So yeah, thank you for, sharing that. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Nick, before I go to the next question to talk about the solutions?
My goodness, Lenitra and Heather really hit the nail right on the head with that. I mean, we can say it's a combination of both, and obviously, I heard, something that I speak about a lot, and that is unconscious bias, and just a lot of the teachers just not being having a lot of training with culturally responsive pedagogy and being able to teach to whoever is sitting in front of them, not who used to sit in front of them. A lot of teachers, have what a friend coined as toxic nostalgia, where they just they refuse to bend with the new times and with the changing demographics of their district, of their classroom, and they are kind of like stuck, and they don't want to do the work to really bring themselves up to who is sitting in front of them and educating the children that are now they're responsible for. So absolutely, I agree with both ladies.
Yes. And so, we talked about, all three of you have shared, what are the challenges and the history of that. But let's talk about, some solutions to that. I know there are, other alternative, models, like reformative justice based practices, diversion programs, healthy school communities, so there's so many different, alternatives than just expelling and, suspending children and then sending them into this, school to prison pipeline. And so I'll go with Nick, since just recently has answered. What are some of the solutions that you see, or models that can be implemented? That's well, first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, what can we do as a community to to get our schools, to put into these alternative models into practice?
Powerful question, great question. Thank you. Um, Part of what I do is, in the system right now is my office works as a bit of a buffer between teachers and teachers' interactions with students and administration and the supports or consequences that they delve out as a result of, misbehavior, if you will, or in the classroom. And so what I would do is, and what Grosse Point, for example, is doing is having this option where students are sent to me to be able to kind of talk out what happened in class and give their side of things in addition to what the teachers have already delivered and reported, and then being able to reach out to parents, talk about what's happening, talk about how their student was just sent out of class, and really have a conversation about that, and talk about shifting mindsets, talk about priorities, talk about being able to advocate for themselves, some of those soft skills, and then being able to be that buffer before it gets to the administrator to then have to give some kind of punitive consequence of some sort, and really coach the child up in ways to be successful. And then I would say that in the community, um, it's just about showing up, and really being present. And I know there's a myriad of reasons why society puts on parents that enable them to be able to show up in the way that they like to in school systems, like or sitting for example, at a IEP conference or what have you. But it's really important to show up, and it's really important to really provide that presence because your child will be treated, unfortunately, a little different when they see there's a parent that's there, right? And then obviously following through and following up to make sure that their child is being given all of the rights and all of the benefits of a young child who has not developed their prefrontal cortex yet, and who is in constantly in fight or flight or freeze when high leverage moments arrive, and helping students to be able to think those moments through, give them practical skills, and just continue to have these conversations at really flexible times throughout the day. One of my things that we do that I co-facilitate is a community talk where once a month we meet at a different school around the points to have conversations in the community about what's happening, and the kind of conversations they need to be having with teachers and with their children. I think again, showing up as that village, being present, and then obviously having people in the school who are trained to be able to help students think differently about their outcomes, be a major piece to that.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Heather, what have you seen worked to alternative models than, going, expelling the suspension? And what can we do as a community to put those things into practice?
I agree with everything that Nick said, and I would add to it that we have to, because I work in teacher ed and I was a classroom teacher for so long, and I still do early intervention. I think that we also have to dramatically change the way we educate teachers and future teachers and work on teacher training. I think that we have to really invest in educating universal design for learning and cultural competency. We have to recruit teachers from these same communities. But just because they're from the same community doesn't mean that we aren't all swimming in ableism, white supremacy, anti-blackness, patriarchy, all of these things. Like, we are all constantly working to dismantle all of these things internally and inside of ourselves. Me, I'm a work in progress. I learn as much from my Gen Z and Alpha students as much as I teach them, or if not more. um, you know so it's something that we all need to invest in, how we create new curriculums that allow entry points for all students regardless of how their bodies work, how their brains function. Are they hearing, do they not hear, how do they communicate, how do they see, not see, as opposed to having just add-ons with accommodations and modifications. We need to work with, like Nick was saying, admin, so that we understand that um, parents don't have a farmer's schedule anymore. So one thing that I noticed that New York City did is they had these parent engagement hours, but they're at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Who is free at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? So something that we have to do is like have flexibility, um, bring in, translators for the different communities that are needed, provide meals, provide ESL services, hygiene services, things like that, things that think outside of the box so that parents feel comfortable coming into the school. A lot of reasons why parents don't engage is because they can't, because they're working every hour God sends. They don't speak the language, the schools are not accessible, or the schools are completely unwelcoming. So we have to really work to make the school the center of the community that it should be. And where I've seen that happen, I have seen so much um, parental involvement, where I have seen, that community involvement. One of the schools that I worked at for early intervention, where I was an EI therapist, we had not class mothers, because that is very exclusionary. We had class family members, we had class grandparents, we had class siblings. And so, these people were background checked and they were safe, but it was so nice. We had a grandparent who came in who was from China, and all the kids who were from all different ethnic backgrounds learned to respect their elders and learned different words in Chinese, and he told stories, and it was just such a beautiful experience. So, you know, that is one of the amazing ways that builds relationships, because so many of our kids, you don't know what they're experiencing, and that's part of like the cultural competency that I see lacking. Um, as well as, like I said, recruiting people from the community so that they have teachers that look like them, as well as training them in these new modalities of thinking and learning. And getting the children before they reach that crisis point. Because one of the things that I notice with getting kids getting IEPs, it's like they have to fail and be in that crisis point before they can get those services. So we should be always working with the families so that it doesn't get to that point. And I'm not talking about the, useless RTI model. I'm saying if we have an open school like what Nick is talking about, the kids are getting the families and the kids, it's an open dialogue. So when the parents need those services, the families need those services, it's already an open dialogue. Does that make sense, Tamika?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a great different, motto, for the school to use. Yes, thank you. And Anitra?
Yeah.
And I wanted to say that both Heather and Nick kind of touched on some things that I would mention. I mean, Heather talked about teacher training, which is very important, the cultural competency of those instructors coming out of these universities. Because I can say, I mean, I went to a great university and was trained as an educator, but I will say that the majority of my education and training that helps me to support students that are divergent or students that are different in my class is because of my investment in what I was doing for children and learning to understand Orton Gilliam, understanding going to trainings by Dr. Levine talking about demystification of disabilities, helping students learn to advocate for themselves, getting training in social emotional learning, restorative practices. Those are things that I've done outside of what I was trained to do or what the school district may offer for me to learn in professional development, because I take what I do very seriously. So I would also add that, just like Nick said, having those trained professionals inside of the schools that are able to bridge the gap between the classroom and the suspension model, because sometimes students don't know how to articulate their emotions. They're not in touch with their feelings and emotions. They're not in touch with what triggered them in that particular point. And so sometimes they need someone who can help walk them through the process, walk them through that experience, and help them develop healthy skills to be able to go back into the classroom, to be able to have access to education. And in addition to educating the parents, providing support for them, educating them about child development so that they can understand what it looks like for a child to develop healthy, so that they can be on the lookout as well as the school, because the parents should be just as informed as the school, if not more, because they are the first line of defense for their children. They are the strongest advocate for their children. And so it is very important that the parents are trained, the staff is trained, and that students are also informed so they can stand up and advocate for themselves as well.
Yes, thank you, thank you. David, do we have any comments that has popped up or interesting comments about this particular topic before you go to the next set of questions?
No, I don't see any. I don't see any comments, but I just wanted to add something. Um, yeah. So now we can go on to the next set of questions. So I think this takes us into the question about IEPs and for 504 plans. Now, much of what we just talked about really brings up this idea of the necessity for a label before you can access services. And the current state of things require that in order for you to get an accommodation, there must be a diagnosis, there must be an IEP or a 504 plan. And from my experience working in the community, I know for a fact that I have worked with many families who I believe could have benefited from accommodations. However, because of the stigma, because of all of what's attached, maybe because it runs counter to their faith and other cultural ways of processing the world, they, they they could not get an IEP, and as a result, their child or children was not accommodated. So let's talk about IEPs and 504s, what they are, and what are some of the challenges, what they are, how they can benefit a family, and what are some of the challenges to accessing that. Lenitra, would you start us off?
Sure.
Thank you.
So the IEP is the Special Design Education Program and related services for children that are diagnosed with a disability or fall under the eligibility categories of the IDEA. And then the 504 is accommodation services and just changes to the learning environment for the student. Both of these can be beneficial to a student if they require additional supports and services. I also believe that it is something that helps to protect children in environments where they need certain supports, but it may not be provided for them. Because I've also worked and seen students get to the point of being expelled from school because a parent did not want to disclose or to talk about the behavioral needs that child needed that was identified through a psychological evaluation. And I tried my best to stress the importance of ensuring that your child has the supports that they need in the environment so that it protects them from being expelled or being put out of a school, not because of their academic inabilities, but because the environment was not as conducive as it could have been had they been informed about the child's needs. So that those things are very important. It can be supportive to students and their families.
It's important to note the IEP does not give a diagnosis, it gives a classification.
Absolutely.
So the school district under IDEA, you get an IEP, the individual education plan, that starts from the age of 3 to the age of 21 when kids age out, although they're extending it a little older due to COVID. It does not give a diagnosis. That's a misnomer. You can only get a diagnosis if you get a neuropsychological evaluation. Those are not provided under IDEA unless you sue for one in your state. So this is very important. Please, let's not confuse families. You cannot get a diagnosis under IDEA. Okay? It's a classification. They are not allowed to diagnose, and under a certain age, under the age of 5, when you're under the Committee for Preschool Education, you don't even get a classification. You are just a preschooler with a disability. So we have to be careful. So EI is birth through age 2.11. You get an IFSP, Individual Family Service Plan. Then when you turn 3, you have the turning 3. From 3 to 5, you have an IEP that's run under the Committee for Preschool Special Education. You are just a preschooler with a developmental disability or a preschooler with a disability. You do not have even a classification because the federal government under IDEA feels that children that young should not even have a classification. So we have to keep the law straight there. So let's just
and I would totally agree with that because the school will not diagnose. They cannot provide.
They can't. They don't have the staff to do it. They're not qualified. And the state is not qualified. So I would recommend that parents get neuropsychological evaluations anyway. It's much better. So what you'll see on your classification when you are old, when your children, the children are older and they're school age and under the committee for special education and they're school age and they're in public school, even if they have a learning disability, it'll only say reading based learning disability. It's not specific enough. So the schools are not really at a point where they can say dyslexia. They don't have neuropsychological evaluations where they can say dyscalculia, yeah, right. Some states will provide services to age 26. This is what they're doing now because of the COVID delay, that they're providing services to age 26. That's a new thing that they've done with the reauthorization with COVID. So the states are doing that, and we want to make sure that that continues happening. We just have to make sure that we have it correct. So it's 13 classifications, and 504 plans also have for health. So like, for example, if you have a child who needs medication given, and that's like their only need under school, but they have to have medication, like they have asthma, they could have a 504 plan for asthma. So that's something may not be, that would fall under 504, a 504, but not under an IEP. So that's something or if they have food allergies, they have to have their food allergy medication, their EpiPen, their epinephrine carried around all the time. They need to be in a nut-free environment, something like that. That would be under a 504 plan. So there's certain health requirements that might be under that, but that wouldn't be under under an IEP. So those are different types of things.
And I would say that that's why it's so important for parents to be at that meeting, because parents are an equal member of that IEP team. They are there to share unique insights about their child that no test or teacher anecdotal notes can really cover, and really address. And that's why it's so important that that parents shift their mindset, and when they come into those meetings, because they're thinking, oh my goodness, I don't know about special ed law, I don't know about these diagnoses, but that's okay. You don't have to. That child, you gave birth to that child, you know what the triggers are for that child, what brings that child joy, and what frustrates that child. And that's the information that IEP teams can use to help create goals, for more successful outcomes, during the school day.
And I like to add to that, because like I said, I had to navigate this journey as well. Being an educator, and dealing with the school system and trying to and actually getting the services and supports needed, for my child. And so that was a process because, like you said, the school does not diagnose. They don't provide a diagnosis. They only provide an eligibility category. And so if the testing isn't done in order to collect the data that would support certain services for your child, then it's going to be a journey to collect data, to monitor it, and to make adjustments along the way. So, because of the insights I had as an educator and the processes that I went through, I was able to get those services and supports for my child. She did have to have a clinical psychologist to do a battery of assessments and actually provide a diagnosis according to the DSM-4 at that time, but the DSM-5. So that had to be utilized in the meetings that I went to for my child. So I had to come as an equal participant to that meeting and bring my information that I knew about my child, as well as the data that was collected on my child, to help push forward to make sure they got what they needed. And so it's very important that parents are aware, that parents are there at the table, and not just speaking from a place of emotion, but it is data that makes a difference. That is what they understand. They understand the data and the documentation that you have, and that is so extremely important for our children to be able to excel as well.
And what Lenitra is talking about, and I completely agree, and I did the same thing, is a neuropsychological evaluation, which is what a psychologist would do, which is the battery of tests. So I recommend that everyone, if you can, gets a neuropsychological evaluation for your child. if it's based on something that is brain based, right? And language based, if that's what the disability is based on. And it is very cost prohibitive. And I will admit that we did a study for ours because in New York City, those evaluations can easily cost $7,000. So if you are in, you know, for families who cannot afford to pay that, I know we could not afford to pay that. There, look to your local university or your local children's hospital and see if they have a study. See if the university where you are has a psychology department where they have PhD students doctoral students who are conducting studies under their mentor where they are doing neuropsychological evaluations, because those are things that you could be eligible for and that you can bring to your IEP meeting, where they would evaluate your child for dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, ADHD. They might be doing an ADOS for autism, different things like that, anxiety disorder. So, different things like that. Also, for speech and language disorders, find out at your local university where are the people who are studying to get their speech and language master's degrees. Find out the local university where people are going for their OT licenses, their occupational therapy licenses. Go there and sign up and see if you can get a free study or a low cost study or a sliding scale study to get the occupational therapy in there, or where they're doing it at a hospital. A lot of these places, your states, your cities, they have low cost programs or studies for graduate students. And at the end of the day, they're all underneath a lead professor who is taking them underneath and who is guiding that student who's actually really conducting the study. And you can get your child in for low cost or free. And then you can bring that data to the IEP meeting and say, look, we have this speech pathology study from the University of Michigan or from, whatever university where you're based, and you bring it into your IEP meeting, and it holds more weight than whatever the school did. And that's what we did. So I highly recommend that to whatever parent I'm working with as an advocate. I'm like, okay, let's see what study we can get you into right now. Let's see what local university is doing something. You want an OT? Okay, let's see what OT we can find that has a program at the local hospital that we can get you into. What speech pathology program has something? What psychologist has something? Exhaust all the resources in your community and see what's out there, because you would be surprised at what you have. So I highly recommend that. I agree with Lenitra. You want that data. And it is really, really helpful, especially when you're looking at diagnoses for things like dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyslexia, anxiety, anything like that, because you are not going to get those kind of diagnoses from the school district.
So thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over now to Tamika. I think wow, this is rich, and this segues perfectly into what Tamika will talk about.
Yes, yes. And I see so many great comments that everyone is sharing. So thank you so much, and the panelists, and thank you to the audience that's watching right now for because we need to have these type of conversations, so that we as a community, as the Black community, can be empowered and advocate for our children. So keep them coming. And if you have any questions as well, I will get to that towards the end of the program. So I know we talk, about the diagnoses and such, but we know one of the biggest challenges in, African American children is overdiagnoses and underdiagnoses. And so, for example, in the Office of Special Education programs, have labeled, African American students with disabilities are more, identified with intellectual disabilities or emotional disturbance. They're all students with disabilities. And again, which we talked about earlier, easier or higher risk to be disciplinary, removal from school. We also know that sometimes learning disabilities can be a challenge. And I know this was a conversation that Alitra and I have spoken about in the past about dyslexia and and those type of things, and so there is a huge other diagnoses of dyslexia, ADHD, learning disabilities, those type of things in Black children, particularly in Black girls, and because their behavior, are seen as, oh, you're lazy or you're defiant. And so they the people, either the parents or sometimes the schools don't, they just the behave, they just um blame the behavior, but do not look at, what are some of the reasons behind that the child might behave in this way because of, ADHD, or maybe because of, anxiety and such. So my question is to the panelists: what role does cultural and societal factors play in diagnosing disabled Black children? And how can we as a community, and my apologies and my kids, but we as a community can help our Black children be accurately diagnosed? So how can, what are societal and cultural factors, and again, how as we as a community can more help our children be accurately diagnosed? So I'll give that to Lenitra. And David, mute me, please.
Well, I would say those are two big things, cultural and societal. In our community, I think it's important for parents to be okay that their child learns differently, that they are differently abled. There's something sometimes where people are ashamed, and unfortunately there's nothing to be ashamed of, because we all have differences in life and so we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, and they should be celebrated, our strengths, and supported for whatever weaknesses we have. So I would say as a culture to embrace that it's okay to have differences, it's okay that you may have needs that are different from someone else's, and that everything can't sometimes people want to use spirituality to be able to navigate or support or not support in certain areas. And I would say that although spirituality is very important, mental health is also important as well. And so they both should be, that is someone's way of life, to be infused together to support the child. And then as a society to also embrace the differences of others. Because we all learn differently, we all experience life differently, and that is a value add, in my opinion. When I work with people, I consider that to be a value add, that you are different, that you do have something different to bring to the table, and it should be supported, it should be encouraged. And I think that parents should definitely become more involved with the school, build those relationships with the teachers and with the community, as well as advocate for your child. Reach out to other organizations to make sure you're educated about certain things that are going on with your child. Try to find a medical practitioner that is in alignment with your beliefs and how you want to navigate the medical support for your child, because all these systems interact with one another. And it is important to have someone on your team that understands your voice and understand what you're trying to do for your child. And if you can find a school and an educator that is willing to advocate for you and your child despite the system's way of doing things, then I think that's also an added value for you as well.
Excellent. Nick, do you want to add something? for that?
Yes, if I may. While Anitra was talking, and I was having all kinds of ear prick moments because I was just starting to really think about, from a school district standpoint, one of the things, and it kind of echoes a little bit of the prior question, but some of the things that, the school system can do to really help, buffer that. Obviously, again, teacher training, and I would say restorative conferences has been one of the biggest pieces that, that I do for my particular school, that actually allows children who are suspended out of school to be able to come back a day or two or three, depending on the length of suspension, to really talk through their differences, and just to provide empathy. Man, empathy should be, a core subject. I mean, it is huge, because that allows parents and children to understand how to resolve conflict in a huge way. I think also we got to look at having our curriculum be, you know, better forms of, mirrors and windows, right? Like, students need to know, they need to be able to see themselves, to know that they are validated and acknowledged, and they are worthy. And then windows, because other students and other people need to see the humanity in all students. And so, when that's echoed throughout the community, we see those things, and we see more parents getting in touch with community resources that they have in their community, parent groups, things of that nature. And obviously, again, we gotta really take the shame and the blame away from, disabilities, right? We have to, again, like Lenitra was saying, we have to just teach to the child who is in front of us, and all of the myriad of ways that they learn, focusing on, what you focus on, you get more of, right? So we have to shift from focusing on trying to attack what the child's challenges are, right? And shift and focus on what a child is doing well in, and really expand and expound on those things, to really give value to that student, so that they have a certain level of self-esteem and confidence when they walk into the schoolhouse, and their parents feel that way as well. So that's my piece there, and I really just echo again a lot of what Lenitra spoke about.
Thank you, thank you. So that's a perfect segue into the next question, and this is our. So the next question is, how do we how do we deal with stigma? So stigma, um, unfortunately, is part of the reality of the disability conversation. And stigma, this idea of a person not being quite human, there's this force, external force, and there's a internal component. Once a person internalizes this idea that they're not enough, that they're not sufficient, that they've not been able to meet whatever the societal expectations are, that's the ableism stuff we talked about. In this specific instant, we're talking about a deviation, a bodily deviation, so to speak. At least that's the way it's understood. And I wonder if you would briefly, because with the time we have left, if you would briefly talk about the impact, right? So the research literature kind of describes um, a form of trauma that results from hiding or from denying that you have a challenge. So, however you want to frame it, but you want to call it disability, you want to call it neurodivergent. There's some clear literature that it creates things like anxiety. It creates a certain amount of disloyalty, right? Because you are, and this is especially true for people who have the quote unquote hidden disabilities. And I've seen this. In graduate school. I've seen it in the classroom. Every opportunity, I've worked with students, and I'm saying, hey, You can benefit from a tutor. No, I don't want a tutor. Then I have to tell them everybody else has a tutor. Most of the people who quote unquote don't have a disability have a tutor. Why can't you get a tutor? Well, people are going to think I'm not enough. So can you talk a little bit about this thing called stigma, and if we could briefly go around and just share your thoughts on stigma and how do we deal with stigma? Heather, would you start us off?
Sure. So I think you're talking about two different things. You're kind of conflating them a little bit. So one is you're talking about the hidden what you mentioned, the hidden hiding
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
So that's different than stigma. So what you're talking about, I think, is you're talking about masking, which is something that people who are neurodivergent, some people who are neurodivergent do. So masking is different than denying that you have a disability. Masking can happen intentionally or unintentionally. And a lot of women who are neurodivergent are very good at masking because we are so socialized to do so. Masking is particularly prevalent, as you say, for people who have so called invisible disabilities, right? You can't necessarily look at us and tell that we have a disability. So you can't necessarily look at me and say she's neurodivergent or whatever. Um, like I said, it's very prevalent among women, among certain communities of color because of the way we're socialized and because we're more at danger for showing up in our authentic selves. It is very different than hiding your disability, though, and we can't conflate the two because oftentimes when you're masking, you don't know you're masking. Um, and masking does cause a lot of trauma and pain and exhaustion, but it's not often intentional. So it's not the same thing as hiding your disability. It's not the same thing as saying, I don't want a tutor when you need a tutor. It's not really the same thing. It's more like masking is more like, I am totally worn out from looking you in the eye and socializing and, you know, showing up a certain way in work because if I don't, they're all going to say that I'm a stuck up black girl. um, but really, I'm just very introverted, extroverted, and being around all of this noise and whatever is wearing me out due to my auditory processing sensory integration disorder. But when I get home, I have to have nobody touch me for 2 hours. Nobody can touch me and come near me for 2 hours. But I have to show up a certain way at work because if I don't, as a Black neurodivergent woman with sensory processing disorder and aphasia, if I show up as my authentic self, I will lose my job. But I might not be thinking that um, in my head. It's something innate in me that I know. It's different than, I don't like. It's sort of different than like not coming to terms with having dyslexia. It's a very different type of like. They're two different things. Um, but I do think that stigma relates to both of them because we live in such an ableist world. um, but masking is definitely a conversation that deserves its own topic, because it does cause trauma, as does hiding. Like hiding if you need a tutor or if you need help or specific instruction. Um, and I think that if we were to have universal design for learning where people could go and have an area in the room where they can be, in a space that was quiet and didn't have sensory interruptions, or the way we taught reading was evidence based and used Orton Gillingham, like Lenitra said, for everyone, because no one is harmed by it, but everyone is benefits from it. Um, and that had entry points for everyone, and that a room that was physically accessible to all, and that allowed augmented communication and ASL, and doesn't just value oral speaking as a way of communication, then there wouldn't be any stigma. So that's why I'm such a proponent for universal design for learning curriculums. And I think that we have to have a sea change in order to dismantle the the stigma around disability. And I think that that comes from, like what Lenitra said, getting the parents and the guardians and the family members in every generation that we have and saying, this benefits us all. It helps your children thrive and to show up in their best self. And so sometimes when we're having those conversations with the parent, we have to have auntie and grandma and grandpa there too, because grandma's there saying, oh, he'll walk when he's ready. He'll talk when he's ready. But grandma and grandpa need to come to that meeting too, so that they hear that this is gonna help your grandbaby. It's not gonna hurt your grandbaby. Does that make sense? Because a lot of that is like generational, and they need to know like it's actually helpful and not harmful.
Thank you, Heather. Tamika, I'm gonna unmute you, and you can uh, help us land the plane, so to speak.
Yes, yes, yes. So, unfortunately, I wish we could talk about this, for another hour and a half. I would say, working at MDRC, this was the best conversation, that I've seen, that I've, moderated. Just so thank you so much to, all the panelists. And so, we're going to be at lead. We're going to have more conversations. This is the things that we do. So on March 21st, we're going to have the intersection of music and disability, which will feature Black disabled or Black people in music, and how to talk about how music can be accessible to people with disabilities. That's going to be in East Lansing. And then also on March 30th at, I believe, 11 o'clock at U of M Detroit Center, we're going to be partnering with a New Detroit organization, where we're going to be talking about race and disability forum. So a little bit of what we talked about today, but it will be more so talking about the intersection and how it manifests, how race and disability manifest in Metro Detroit. And so those are some things that we're excited to conversations to have in the coming future. And then also we have two cohorts that we are going to be hosting for 8 weeks. We have one cohort for parents, BIPOC parents who have children with disabilities. And so you will learn a little bit of what we've talked about today, and how to advocate for your child, and how to make changes that you want to see in your community. So there's one cohort that will be starting up soon. Also, we have a cohort for BIPOC individuals with disabilities 18 and older. So we want to, develop leaders in Michigan to, take, the state by storm per se, to really make the changes that we want to see in our community. And so if you want to have more information on these upcoming events and programs that David and I are offering, please continue to like Michigan Disability Rights Coalition Facebook page, LinkedIn page. Also, you can email me and David. You can email me at Tamika, Tameka, at mymdrc.org, or you can email David at mymdrc.org, and just let us know you would like to know more information, and we'll definitely keep you in loop of all events that we're doing, because again, it's our mission to empower and educate the BIPOC community in Michigan, particularly parents and adults with disabilities. And so just real quickly to our panelists, if you could just share where people can find you in case they have questions, or just want to have, would like to talk to you more detail. So Nick, can you please share your information?
Yes, absolutely. if you'd like to continue this courageous conversation, this wonderful conversation on, how to really, empower our Black families, our students, and continue to push them to change our mindset about things, you can reach me at 313 and also at nicksymonette@gmail.com. That's NickSymonette@gmail.com. And that also puts you into my piece for minor mindset, which is my adolescent coaching piece. Thank you. It
Nick,
is an honor to be a part of this group, this knowledgeable panel. Thank you, Lanisha and Heather, for letting me be a part of this with you all. You all just contributed a tremendous value and amount of knowledge to this conversation. And thank you to the coalition for this invitation. Continue to do that good work.
Nick, could you put
Thank you.
your contact information in the chat? I want to make sure I get it out to. Right, thank you.
Yes.
Will do. Thank you,
Yeah,
sir.
go ahead.
Lenitra, where can people find you?
Thank you, Tamika. People can find me. You can go to my website, which is www.insight, with an S.com. There you can get my contact information, number, and follow up with me there. I look forward to supporting you in making your journey and trajectory for your child or your program and working with you a success. And thank you so much for having me on this panel with these wonderful people. We've learned a lot, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. And Heather.
Hi, everyone. You can find me on Instagram at learning_advocate, and also my LinkedIn, which I'll put in the chat. I actually sent all my information to you, Tamika. I'm just pulling it up here so that you have it. So I don't actually know it all offhand. I send it out all the time, but I have people can find me. If everything is on my Instagram, and that's where you can find everything, including my LinkedIn, my articles that I've written. I have 2 articles, one about how to support Black families in school, one about social emotional that I just wrote, ways you can support your early age children through high school, um, and I'm different things that I've written for magazines, um, and my LinkedIn. That's a great way to message me, is through LinkedIn. Actually, that's how Tamika messaged me.
Yes, yes.
uh, so yeah, I'm so honored to be here with the amazing panelists. I've learned so much from all of you, and Tamika and David, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to continuing the fight with you. If you're in New York City, we are really fighting to get Albany to pass solutions, not suspensions. We really want to put the pedal to the metal and get Albany to pass that, because we don't want suspensions anymore in New York State, especially for our disabled children. So we are going to be continuing to push that. And since New York City is the biggest school district in the country, we can get that passed in New York, then we can use that as a sea change for the country. So please follow me and join that fight. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again, and thank you for the audience for joining us. And that concludes today's session. So we'll see all of you next time. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, audience. Thank
Maybe you
you.
have to end the broadcast.
Oh,
And thank you, Nakia, for your wonderful signing.
thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Micaiah.
Or Nakaya, sorry. Okay. Do we just sign off or?
Are we done here or?
Okay.
Okay, just sign. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye, Nick. It was nice to connect.
Yes, absolutely, Heather. I'll definitely connect with you on that
Oh
piece.
yeah, my email here.
Insight Solutions, Incited.
This is my email, the Learning Advocate. I just didn't want to put my email here because then I get like tons of spam.
Okay. And where you at?